an ongoing issue with people booking tickets and not arriving.
Often up to 1/3 of people. In England we had 1/3, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Is it the same here?
Very close, yeah.
We put out the amount of chairs for the amount of tickets, so
Oh,
using a spare
yeah.
chair.
Wow.
Yeah, so it's quite a lot.
Quite a lot.
Yeah.
And it's
Free events, you see, people don't think very much. Yeah. Yeah, it'd be more than close to 30 years.
yeah. Do we take it back to 56 chairs? I'll have to check.
Yeah, 56 chairs around. Yeah.
And there's four coming.
Yeah. Yeah.
It does get quite difficult when you get close to the end, emotionally.
Yeah.
And maybe
Yeah.
people just
Yeah,
easier to
spiritual.
find some other excuses.
Yeah.
That's exactly, yeah. So some people cancel, like after I send out that email, I usually send out an email to, if you can't make it, please cancel, like you all would have received. At that point, usually 5 or 6 people cancel.
Yeah.
And then usually some just vote a third or,
As it gets.
and then, people
More
feel,
real.
feel stressed and worried and then they don't come. Yeah. But it's difficult then to find venues because, we're catering for a certain amount. And then, for this event, we had a waiting list for quite a long time and people wanting to come. And when people cancel very close, obviously many of you come from other countries, you don't really have time to make arrangements if someone cancels the day before or something. So, it's tricky for us to find venues, especially when we're paying quite a lot for a venue as well, and we go to a lot of trouble to make it comfortable for everybody. And then,
Yeah, so it's a bit difficult arranging things generally. And we end up with a lot of opportunities lost, I suppose, in that regard. Because there's other people who would have liked to have come that can't get in. And then we're thinking in the future of overbooking our events by 1/3, because that's about how many people are not coming the first day without any indication or cancellation. Yeah. And just, if too many people rock up, then people have to sit on the floor type thing. Yeah. It's a bit tricky when you've got wooden floors, and a lot of our venues, like in the UK and stuff, were hard floors, and Portugal's the same. Yeah. This venue is quite comfortable sound-wise as well. Some of the other venues are hard to set up.
Yeah.
All right, well, we just have to probably get started, otherwise we might be waiting forever.
I was going to wait just a few more minutes. Okay.
Sure.
No.
Yeah, that's good.
Very good. Thanks, Ellen.
Yeah.
Thanks, guys. Had a helping team here this morning, which is really nice. We
Pick them up in England.
picked them up in England and they followed us. They followed us here. It's been very nice because usually everywhere else, Jesus and I have been doing everything. Chairs and speakers and sound and everything. So it's lovely to have some help put out signs for you and stuff as well.
So I have to say welcome to you guys, really. How many of you are actually from Ireland? Okay.
Oh, yeah, nice. No, so about half, maybe?
Yeah, maybe a bit less than half, but
Less than half.
welcome to you,
well,
Irish.
Yeah. Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us. It's the very first time we've been to Ireland, as we were saying earlier.
Yeah.
And we're not going to get much chance to enjoy your country because we're off to Canada next week. But and obviously we just come here, set up, get everything sorted out, come and do the event for 3 days and then go again. But hopefully at some point in the future we can get out in the bush somewhere.
Yeah.
If you've got any bush left, is there any bush left?
I don't think the golf course counts.
Yeah. Mind you, they all seem very dedicated to their golf. We arrived at 8:30 this morning, so 9 o'clock, and they were all out there.
Yeah.
On Australia, a day like this, the golfers would just say, "Oh, it's too cold."
All right.
Yeah,
Well,
who's from other countries? Sweden. How many Swedish in here? 5.
yes.
And
Where
what
else?
other countries we got? We got Norway.
Norway. Hello, Norway.
Norwegian.
Do you guys all know each other from Norway?
No.
There you go.
So put your hand, leave your hands up if
Put your hand up if you're from Norway.
Norway. So
Yep.
just look at everybody so you can maybe meet each other afterwards.
Yeah.
Those of you from Ireland can do the same. If you put your hands up Irish,
Do you all know each
do you
other?
know each other?
No.
No? There you go. So first time,
Yep.
so you get a chance to meet each other. Okay, now we've got other countries, right? So
We've got Spain.
Right.
Yeah. One. It's not a pain in Spain. No pain in Spain.
No pain in Spain.
That's why you have to get out because they keep telling you there's no pain there and you need to have your pain. Yeah, we'll let you know that there's pain. Okay, where else?
Israel, Portugal.
Israel, Portugal. Hello, Talia.
Hello, Talia.
Yeah, and Nelly from Portugal.
From Portugal.
And also Netherlands, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Australia, there's one.
Yeah.
Besides Maryland.
Armenia.
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 Hello. Did you come all the way from Armenia now?
Yes.
Yeah.
And only for this one.
And only for this one. Wow.
Yeah.
Germany.
Germany.
Germany? How many from Germany?
That's it. 3, 4.
Do you guys know each other? No.
No? There you
No?
go.
You might after today.
Yeah.
US.
You got the
US?
US? Yes.
Who else?
US?
There's Mandy.
US.
Someone at the back we haven't
Yeah.
met yet. And
Yeah. We are going to the US. Are you going to be there too? Some, maybe. All right.
England, there's some English people here, isn't there?
And Scotland.
Oh, Scotland. The UK. Yeah.
Which doesn't seem very united.
No. All right, we'll do English and Scottish separate. So English people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
English.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
And
Scottish.
he's Scottish.
Yeah. You're in London. Is there any left over?
Do we miss Austria? Switzerland.
Switzerland and Austria.
Yes.
There we go. Switzerland and Austria.
Oh, it's a real mixed bag this morning.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, and New Zealand. Yeah, I think New Zealand and England. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. You are dual, aren't you?
Yeah. Good night.
All right. Well,
You want to do the normal letting everybody know where everything is?
yes.
Hmm.
Yeah. I did want to do some welcoming too, but you
Yeah.
stole my thunder.
Yeah.
I wanted to say, just for the benefit of the recording, we're halfway through our 4-month trip at the end of on Sunday. So we've been travelling for 2 months already. And as we were talking about before we started, we're still sleep deprived. It's the tour of little sleep.
Yeah.
So we're not quite firing on all cylinders today, but hopefully it's a lovely little group, and we can have some nice talks together about spiritual matters.
Yeah.
All right. Yes.
Microphones and other
Yes.
things
No.
like that.
I
we can sort
know.
out.
I was just thinking if there was any other newsy things I wanted to say, but I think that's it.
No, probably not.
No.
Well, we'll, for those of you who want to know news from other places and whatever, we might leave that for a Sunday discussion, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's see. All right, and so today what we're probably going to do, we always say we'll have toilet breaks. It just depends a little bit on how the discussion is flowing. So the last 2 weekends, we just had a break for lunch in the middle of the day. But if you do need to go out and use the bathrooms during the talk, you're absolutely welcome to. Do you know where they are? Yeah, so they're out into the hallway, turn left up the hallway, and then they're there on your right. If you do happen to go to the loo during the talks,
And the loo is the toilet, by the way.
yeah.
Australian loo.
I'm sure you say
Yeah.
could you refrain from using the hand dryers while we're talking, just because you can hear it all the way in here? So in the breaks, feel free to use the hand dryers. It's lovely and warm in those toilets actually, so if you get cool in here, just go and warm up in there. But yeah, if you could refrain from using the hand dryers, because we'll hear it in here. We'll have a break for lunch, and it's fine to eat in the room, so we might have lunch just at the back of the room if it's quite cool outside. If it's fine, we can go outside and sit on the grass. So maybe not on the golf course, but the people who run the place said that there's grassy areas we can go and sit.
Don't sit on the fairways.
Yeah.
Bound to get clobbered by
a
golf ball or something.
Yeah. The format for today is going to be similar to what we've done the last few weekends, where Jesus and I will present some truth, if you like, some material, a kind of a topic that we're going to cover for the next couple of days, and then we'll open up to questions after that. And please feel free to ask any question that you have that's on the topic. We love questions. No questions are silly. It's all a part of you getting the most out of your time here, is you being engaged. So when you want to ask a question, please raise your hand. And we need some people to help out with microphones today. Who would like to volunteer? Yvonne? Yes? And Brian, thank you. Now, you just need to position yourselves in an aisle seat, so maybe we need to do a few swaps there. Olga, I wonder if you would mind swapping with Yvonne, and then thank you. So when I'm finished this explanation, I'm going to give the microphones, one to Brian, one to Yvonne, and they'll be holding them. When you want to ask a question, raise your hand. Brian and Yvonne will only come to you if Jesus or I indicate we're going to your question. And then when you handle the microphone...
Keep your hand up when we select you, because the people who are running the mics don't know you. So if you can keep your hand up...
Until the mic
comes to you.
Yeah.
Yep.
And then when it comes to you, in order for us to get good sound through the microphone, if you can put the mic on your chin and your chest, like I'm doing here, it means that you're talking into the microphone quite close. Some of you have soft voices, and so we often lose it if you move the microphone away or what have you. If you just think chin and chest, it helps you just to remember what you need to do, and then you can focus on the question. Yep. Keep the mic with you until we've finished discussing your question, because you might want to add things or ask other things. So the mic runners will stay nearby to you until that happens, and then you'll take it back and come back to your seats. Mic runners, and I'll explain this to everyone because other people might want to have a go at being a mic runner over the weekend. When you're holding the microphone, don't bump it against your body because it'll come through in the sound. You can hear that. So you just want to hold it. You can hold it across your lap, just some way where the microphone isn't bashing on things. Same thing goes when you're passing it around. Just make sure you don't bash it into things, especially if one of Jesus or I are speaking while you're handling the microphone, then it comes through the sound all across our voice. So please don't adjust anything on the bottom of the microphones. We're running a continuous recording that's syncing between the 4 microphones, and if you mute or turn off, it interferes with the overall output. So if you can just literally be a mic runner, that would be wonderful. Thank you. You don't have to be a mic adjuster, I mean.
Yeah.
All right. That was all I wanted to cover, I think. And I'll join you in covering some other things now.
Yeah, so what we've been finding in a lot of our events so far is that people have been thinking that we're their guests rather than them being our guests. And that's been sort of causing a lot of interesting issues in terms of how we deal with people. So the fact is, we pay for this venue. We organised the venue with the help of some people who are local. So we'd firstly like to thank those people. So
particularly Marie.
So if you put your hand up, Marie, so everyone can see you, Marie. And we found the venue for us, and also she's given us her house for 1 week to live in, so that we don't have to pay accommodation here as well. So that's wonderful. Thank you so much for that. Yeah. The other thing is that all the speakers you see, we normally would have to hire all of that gear because we can't travel with it. But as it's turned out, some people in England bought all the speakers, and they bought 4 speakers so we could do larger events as well, which we did in England. And all the speaker stands and a few microphone stands and everything. And they bought all of that, and Anna brought them from England to Ireland for us. So we'd like to thank those people who paid for those things, and also Anna. And of course, the reason why we've done that is we hope to return at some point, and therefore we'll have speakers next time as well. Does that make sense? And we've already used them, all 4 speakers in England twice, and we're also thinking in the future we'll probably use them in Europe as well. So they'll actually go with us travelling. In future, we're already planning our next year's trip as well, and we're thinking that we will probably hire a van, and Mary and I will travel with the speakers as well as our gear all the way through Europe, England, and potentially Ireland as well. So that means then that we don't have to next year go through the whole rigmarole of hiring speakers and speaker stands and everything like that as well.
To give you some context, we are travelling with the sound gear that you can see over to the right-hand side of us there. In these 2 big cases you can see underneath. So all of the antenna and our microphones and so on we're travelling with, but the speakers and the speaker stands in each location we were having to hire. So having the guys purchase them for us to use in a number of countries in Europe reduces our ongoing costs quite a lot. So that's really good.
So we're looking forward to using them many times in Europe in the future. And obviously, once venues get too large, you know, where they're 200, or more than 250 people or so, we'll have to use some other equipment than what we've currently got. But what we've currently got does the job for the moment. Yeah. So we'd like to thank those people for organising that. We'd also like to thank some people in Australia actually who paid for a third of our trip. So they don't really want you to know who they are. They just have been generous enough to pay for a third of our trip. So they paid more than 50,000 Australian towards our trip, and that has enabled us to come. Actually, without that, we wouldn't have never come on this trip at all. So that's something to bear in mind. We'd like to thank them too. Would you like to thank them? So
I'm just going to adjust that door because we're not going to use that door, guys. There's another door at the back there that you're welcome to come in out as well. That was something else I wanted to cover.
Yeah.
I'm used to ducking for the cameras. Hey guys, I'm just going to lock this door, but you can come in that one back there. Yeah. We'll all know, won't we? I'm having an issue with locks. Everywhere we stay, there's a different lock, isn't there? And here and in England, they have those ones where you pull up when you turn it. And it took me a good week in Linton to do that. Every time.
Yeah. It's funny when you travel, you get used to all of these things that are different. You know, and one thing we noticed in Europe is everything is about 3/4 the size of what you need. So your bath towels are 3/4 the size of what your body needs to wipe it. Your kitchens are 3/4 the size. The fridges are 3/4 the size of what you can put in it. Like what you put in it. Your car park spaces are 3/4 the size of what you need. The rows are 3/4 the size of what you drive. And this is all pretty unusual for us. Pretty unusual for an American to understand. Yeah. It just shows you different countries and their standards are quite different. Yeah.
But you were saying this is our event, and you guys are our guests, and that means that we have paid for the seat that you're sitting on, and that we don't have to give any more than we want to. And we're saying all that in very pleasant tones, but in a very firm way, because we've had some issues in prior events with people feeling quite entitled to take quite a lot from us, and that's something that we're just wanting to iron out and make sure that we look after ourselves very well as well.
Yeah.
And also help you understand how love is in practice. And when you take without regard for the resources involved, or even with the tickets where people aren't showing up when they've booked a ticket, a lot of those things are very out of harmony with God's standard of love, which is something that Jesus is going to talk more about later on today, and something we've been discussing in the last couple of weekends.
So it's like you're visiting our home. What we found is a lot of people want to argue with me when I present information, and I'm not interested in having arguments with you. I'm just going to present the truth as we know it to be, and if you don't agree with it, well, that's just too bad. Does that make sense? And you don't need to argue about it, and you can just say I don't agree, and I'll say fine. And that's important, because at the end of the day, being the guest of somebody, you need to bear in mind that I've given you this gift, and it is a gift we're giving people all around the world. At this stage, we've not had any. At this stage, we've hardly covered our expenses for this trip, and what it tends to work out is we just get enough funds to pay for the expenses plus our food. And Mary and I don't generally get paid at all from these trips, in the sense that we don't have a wage that we earn from them or anything like that. And the main reason why is because there's not enough donations generally to cover that kind of thing. So basically we're doing everything we're doing for free, and it's very important to bear that in mind in the event. And we're going to make sure in the future that we make sure that every person who becomes demanding, we're going to have a talk to you about your demands. Does that make sense? Yeah. All right. Another thing we'd like to do is probably just address some spiritual matters about spirits that are here and things like that. But I think we might delay doing that until it becomes more obvious to you that these are issues. We noticed, though, we just want to say something. We noticed that you Irish, so put up your hands, you Irish. We noticed that you're very, very tolerant, quite considerate of others. Generally, you don't make a fuss about much. Is that how it is? Is that a general thing? And you don't like to have arguments very much, right? So, and as a result of that, you tend to get bossed around a bit. Have you noticed that? Many of you would notice that. And it's sort of like there's almost like this agreement that if somebody bosses me around, I'll be kind and considerate to them. And if I can do what they want me to do, I'll do that. But if it turns out that I can't, then I won't make a big confrontation about the issue. I'll just try to deal with it as softly as possible. Is that the general demeanour, it seems? And so we like you Irish, to be frank, in the sense that, you're kind and considerate and those kind of things. What we noticed, though, is that also opens you to being bossed around spiritually. There's a tendency for spirits to be around you that you're not aware of, and those spirits have a tendency to boss you into doing things, which is something we'll talk about over the course of the group.
It's like if everyone was kind and considerate and wanted to get along, there wouldn't be a problem, would there? But no. Unfortunately, in the world that it is today, there's some people who want to take advantage of people who just want to get along and be kind.
Yeah.
And it is a part of learning how to love, is as a person who wants to be kind, also speaking up when somebody is trying to push you outside of where you want to go. Because they're being unloving towards yourself. So it's something that I think will come up in our discussions a bit this weekend, but something already that we feel spiritually is happening for you guys here in Ireland.
Yeah. As a result, there's a tendency that people who like bossing people are attracted to Ireland. So in other words, foreigners who come in, and many even in this group, are more sort of bossy and demanding, and they would like to boss you around a bit. So we're going to address those issues as we talk about things this weekend. Because the subject we're going to talk to you about is God's standard of love. So it's been a theme we started talking about since Portugal, I think it was.
Yeah, yep.
And we're going to contrast that standard with like human standards of love, I suppose you could say. And we wanted this weekend in particular focus on examples of it, like practical examples of it in 4 primary areas, which we'll talk about in a minute. But God's standard of love is very, very different to human standards of love. And this is why the majority of people, when they pass into the first sphere of the spirit world, rather than at least into the 6th sphere of the spirit world. Because the standard of love on earth differs greatly from the standard of love that God has set. And we want to talk about that in terms of some theory first, and which we'll talk about for about an hour and a half this morning. And then we'd like to give practical examples and open the discussion to everybody in terms of what it looks like in practice in different areas of your life. And so that's our goal today, and we'll probably continue that tomorrow. We want to focus, though, on principles. So we've been very focused in the last couple of groups on presenting principles rather than individual responses to your individual problems. So when you raise an issue with us, what we'll probably try to do is refer it to the principles that you can use to solve any issue, but also solve any type of issue like yours. So that way it makes the answer more generalised, but also makes it that you can apply it to every situation in your life, rather than just the situation you're currently facing. Because we would like to help you to sort of come to the stage where you can help yourself really well. You know how to solve your own problems. You know how to understand them and grasp them and then solve them. So we'd like to help you do all that as well. So how many of you have not ever been to a seminar before? Yep, so fair majority. So yeah, more than half. So welcome to your first seminar, right? That we present. They are not unusual, as many in the media seem to claim. They're just a normal presentation of information, facts, and it's up to you whether you decide to retain those facts or leave them be or whatever. Obviously, it'll be to your advancement and advantage if you do apply or do come to understand as truth what we're presenting, and we'll explain why that will be to your advantage or not, depending on what you select. But we're not going to force you to do anything. Mary and I don't run a cult, and that would be a nightmare to us if we did. So
we're already very tired of this.
Running our own life, let alone running yours as well. So yes, we're not interested in any of that at all, ever. And we're not, even some of the things we are setting up in Australia and hopefully in other countries are all more to create a teaching environment where people can come to learn truth. And many of you who have watched our videos would already perhaps know that, right? So that's what we'd like to do here too. That's the purpose of being here, is to teach some truth and then let you make some decisions for yourself. So when it comes to God's standard of love, one of the principles we'd like to focus on, what is love as God says it is, not as you think it is. And there's a big contrast between what love is as God says it is versus what love as humans believe it to be actually is. Now, how many of you have never watched a video at all? No? All right, so all of you have watched at least one of our videos. So
and who has been following along with this trip so far with those videos?
Yeah? Okay, so
Yeah.
you already have gotten some of these principles from some of the videos. Now, the recent videos, of course, haven't been done, so I don't think Portugal's been done yet.
Yep, it has. Yep.
Has it?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay.
And there's audio up, I think, even from last weekend.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So we are putting some raw audio up for the videographers to use, which is on one of our sites already. And over the next few weeks when I'm in Canada, I'm hoping to get all of the audio up that you can download from one of our sites that's nice and clear audio. It's clearer than what you've probably already heard. So We're hoping to get that up in the next few weeks, but of course it depends a lot on Mary and my time, and we haven't had a lot of it at this stage. So we must also say thank you for the people who have doing some videos and putting those up, because they've got no affiliation with us aside from just coming along and saying we want a video. So thank you to those people. It lets you watch these things, doesn't it?
And actually there is a video being taken today. If you can just be mindful of not bumping this tripod.
So there's a small tripod
in
here.
front of Charlotte.
So just for these
And
three
when
people
you
here in particular,
walk-
if you can walk around that side
Yeah,
rather
rather
than
than in
down,
front.
that would be great. Yeah. Good day. All right, so let's look at this problem or issue of God's standard of love. Now, those of you who've already listened, you would already know that I've been saying to people, you've got the spheres of the spirit world, which are basically different places where love, of different gradients of love, you can basically call them. So you can't enter the sixth sphere of the spirit world, for example, unless you have the love inside of you as a feeling that matches that location. And it has to be a feeling, it can't just be a thought. Now, there is a version of love that are just thoughts. And in Greek, it's agape, or principled love, which is the thought to do something morally right, to do something good for others. That is a principled form of love, often driven by the mind of a person, but it doesn't necessarily have to correspond with a feeling, right? And what we're trying to do is help people understand that love is a feeling, with the exception of when you're basing love based on a principle. You haven't got a feeling for a person then, but you've got a feeling for the principle. Does that make sense to you? So there's principled form of love, which is, am I doing the right thing by you? That's a principled form of love. And then there's other forms of love, such as brotherly affection, like you're my brother or my sister. That's a different feeling, isn't it, inside of you, if you think about it, where you feel for the person as if they are close to you, like a family, almost a family to you. And you know, many of you know that even people in your family don't feel that way, but then there's other people you meet and they feel like, oh, this is my sort of soul sister or brother, because they feel very similar to you. When you get together, you can chat about things. And this is a feeling of brotherly or sisterly affection for the person. So there's that version of love. There's also versions of love regarding like family. So that's and based upon also about things like relationships. So in other words, Mary and I, we have a friendship, but we also have a sexual relationship. So the sexual relationship is erotic version of love, like a romantic love, isn't it? And for Mary and I, it's like the only feeling of romance we have is towards each other, towards no one else. So if somebody else expected to have a romantic relationship with me, isn't going to be possible, right? Because so there's some forms of love that are aimed just at the other person, and then there's some forms of love that are aimed generally. And it's important for us eventually to understand these versions of love so we know what it feels like as an emotion to express these kinds of love. So, and
what you're really saying there, isn't it, is that even in all those forms of love that Jesus has just described, on earth, what we're calling love in those instances is often very corrupted.
Yeah.
But there is God's standard of love that we can bring
in every one of those forms of love. Yeah, every one of them has a standard that God has set.
A feeling for God's principles that are in harmony with love, or a feeling of romantic love that's in harmony with God's standard, or a friendship or a brotherly or fellowship, sort of a feeling with others that's in harmony with God's standard.
Yeah. So what we're interested in is, what is God's standard of love with regard to these different types of love, right? That's what we're really talking about. Now, many of you would have already known from what we've previously discussed that when God designed the human soul, he designed it as a perfect unit, a perfect soul that splits in half when it incarnates, and two bodies are, I don't know if the man's wearing dresses nowadays, but I know the Scottish do wear kilts, but I'm not. Right, so two two bodies created, physical body, spirit body, and of course, in this case, a heterosexual soul would have the female side for the predominantly feminine half of the spirit body of the soul. So you know that this occurs, and this soul, when it incarnates, actually God designed it to be in that condition of love. So even though it doesn't, at the time of incarnation, it doesn't know itself, it doesn't understand itself, the whole purpose of incarnation is to have an experience so you come to understand yourself. God designed the condition of love to be in the sixth sphere of the spirit world. Now, that means that humans created these other spheres. God designed in the universe the potential for humans to degrade their condition of love, and as they degraded their condition of love, the law created the areas where they could now live that matched their condition. Right? So humans created every sphere from the fifth to the first by degrading their condition of love. So that means at the moment, as we've been drawing in this trip, human condition of love is actually in the lower portion of the hells, right? Of the first sphere of the spirit world. So this area, about halfway down, further down, is called the hells of the spirit world. And the spirits who live there refer to it as the hells of the spirit world. And that is the condition where earth is. So that's where we live. So it's the condition of earth. Now you can see that condition is far removed from God's standard of love. So that means the condition of earth that we have grown up with is far removed from what God views love to be. It's actually 6 spheres removed, isn't it, from the perfect human person that God designed. So it's actually quite degraded condition. And yet for the majority of us, when we first hear that, we go, but I think I know what love is. And, you know, like I love my partner and I have my family and I love them and, you know, and I care about people. And the average person who's going, it doesn't apply to me, I'm not in that place. But obviously if the average condition of earth is that place, then it's highly likely the average condition of the average person is in that place too, isn't it? Right? So this is something that we need to at least be open to considering for ourselves, that how we see love ourselves is highly distorted from how God wanted it to be for the perfect human. And this is without a relationship with God. This is without establishing any relationship or friendship with God. Just perfect human living as a perfect being would be in that sphere, and every child incarnating is actually in that place as well, in that condition. When I say incarnating, I mean at the time of conception, they are in that place. By the time they enter the earth itself, come on the earth physically, when they're born, often they're in either the 4th or 5th sphere location. Already they've received damage from their parents to the point where they're still even here at a higher condition of love. But the difference for a child is they're not aware of their condition. So they don't know how to generally grow that condition. Nobody's generally educating children nowadays about how to grow in love. Most of us are educating children in other ways. You think when you went to school, the very first, when you're in grade 1 or, you know, when you're, say, 5 years of age in Australia, it is, I don't know what it is here in Ireland when you first go to school. What is it? 4? 4.5, 5. So around that time, imagine the very first year was just focused on teaching you about love. Now that would be very interesting, wouldn't it, in terms of what would happen to the child now understanding what love is in terms of for the rest of their life. But that's not what happens. They taught how to speak or write or a bit of maths or other things that the world view is important. But God actually says, no, those kind of things are far less important than learning about love. So the problem is the child, by the time they've arrived, when they're born, they're in the fourth sphere, and usually by the time they are 7 years old, they are in the house with their parents, right? Due to what they've absorbed and what they've felt from the environment, and how they've also been educated by the environment has had a large impact on that degradation occurring. And usually in the teenage years, they then act upon that condition and oftentimes even degrade themselves even further. So many teenagers are often in the lower hells by the time they're a teenager, because they're starting to act on things like puberty. During puberty, they start acting on sexual impulses, and because they've been trained to act on them in the same way the world generally around them does, this causes them then to act in ways that finish up degrading their condition further. And then during the 20s and 30s, most people sort of stabilise that a bit. And sometimes nowadays, it's unfortunately in the 40s or 50s that they start stabilising that bit, where they go a bit wild in their teenage years and in their 20s, and they stay a bit wild sometimes nowadays, even into their 30s, right? And it's only once they've had a bit of experience in life and start recognising the pain that such things are causing, that they start increasing their condition and saying, I'm not going to do that anymore. I've got to deal with that and not act in that manner anymore. So you think the average young man in his 20s or teens, late teens, he would drink a lot, right? But then by the time he's in his late 20s or even 30s, if he's usually had some negative results from drinking a lot that has caused him to maybe temper, tone down his actions. And so as a result of that, he raises his condition a little bit, right, to be what the average is. So they drink occasionally, just like everybody else does, rather than getting drunk every night and every weekend, that kind of thing. Does that make sense so far? Yeah. So you can see that the Earth's condition is not very good, and we've all been educated in this Earth. So as a result, we can't expect our condition, by the time we hear of any truth, from God's perspective, we can't expect our condition to be anywhere near what God's standard of love is, because our education has been in completely the opposite direction. So that's the issue we face. The problem is we have an image of ourselves to uphold, to ourselves, right? And that image of ourselves is often thinking, I'm up here somewhere. I'm better than I want to believe that I'm better than what God's standard of love is demonstrating to me I am. So unfortunately, that creates in us a deep resistance to hearing truth about what God's standard of love actually is. Right? Now, God has put into place a number of systems to help you get out of this place, out of the place where the earth is. God's put into place a number of personal systems which are to do with just you and God, really. And then God has also put into place laws that help govern your future direction. And it's very important to start to also understand that. So what we've introduced, and I might just quickly say, just hopefully I've got enough clearance. Just not too much. So God has put into place a group of things. Firstly, there's things that are personal to you, and those things are the operation of the conscience, which is not just your conscience. The conscience is a mechanism that God designed in the soul, in each half of the soul actually. God designed a mechanism via which God could share truth with you, and all you need to do is ask. But you have to ask at an emotional level. That's how the conscience works. So the conscience works in an emotional way. Now you can see straight away that if we tune down or out of our emotions, the more we tune out of our emotion, the less sensitive the conscience is going to become. But when a person is a child, generally that conscience is quite well attuned. So an example is, how many of you can remember the first time you stole something? Like, yeah? And how did it feel? Did you feel like, oh, that was great? Or did you feel like, oh, you felt a bit bad about that? For most people, they felt a bit bad about it, right? And that's because the conscience at that point in time was quite attuned to there being something wrong, and it's attuned to God's truth about whether they did the right thing or not. Right? So what then happens generally is, if the attunement results in some pain and we don't feel that pain, we tend to try to shut down the operation of the conscience. So we detune from it further, so the next time you steal, if that was a pattern, you have more justifications for doing it. Right? And this is how people get into a pattern of doing something wrong. Initially, generally, the conscience does bother them, and particularly when they're younger, it bothers them. But then as they do it more often and more often and more often, you have to desensitize yourself, emotionally desensitize yourself to letting it sort of tell you there's something wrong, or letting yourself feel pain because of what you did. And as a result of that, most people detune from the conscience. But the conscience is a personal tool that God has to share truth with you, and it's not just yours. So it's not we were talking about this last week in England. Some people were saying, isn't it just an inbuilt mechanism that where I measure what is right and wrong? And the answer to that question is no, it's not an inbuilt mechanism that's just yours. It's a mechanism via which God can share God's actual moral truth with you. And so therefore, it's a mechanism that involves God sharing truth and your ability to hear it. Right? And the more you desensitize, the less ability you have to hear it, obviously. And so you act like you're without a conscience, eventually. Right? Or what happens for most people is they're without a conscience in certain areas of their life, and they have a conscience in other areas of their life. And there's certain areas of life where you want to be desensitized, and there's other areas of your life that you like to, understand what's going on, and so therefore you're more sensitive. Right? But that's a personal gift that God has given you to share truth with you. And it's not just truth about you, it's truth about everything. You can ask truth about how the world works and how the universe works, and all sorts of things you can discover, as long as you are emotionally open to receiving the answer, and that's the critical part. You have to have a certain level of development, sensorially and emotionally, in order to receive answers. An example of that is, like, let's say you've got a 3-year-old child, and he's got a fairly good connection with conscience, and he asks Mummy, where did I come from? Like, pretty basic question. Where did I come from? And now, if Mum goes into a big scientific explanation of where the child came from, if the child does not have the intellectual development or emotional development to understand the answer, then it's just going to go way over the top of its head, isn't it? So Mum talks about cells and, cells coming from the man, cells coming from the women, and all of it, which is actually what's going on. But if she talks about all of that, it makes it really technically accurate. If it's beyond the development on many levels, if you think about it, it would be divine. If it's beyond your development intellectually, if it's upon your greater than your development emotionally, but it's also greater than the experience level you've had, and it's also greater than the exercise of the senses that you have. So an example of that is the sexual development of the child hasn't worked yet, and so the sexual responses to their penis or vagina is not going to be anywhere near as sensitive as once they've developed. So if it's beyond the sensory development of the child, then of course the child won't understand the answer. That makes sense? Yes, if we question.
Just in terms of being a child and how to differentiate, you know, as a child growing up with your own soul, you know, be good, behave. And how do I differentiate that between what my parents tell me and what's like, as in my earth parents with God?
Yeah, we'll come back to that, but just in terms of brief answer for you now, if you look at this is where your parents are, naturally when they say be good, they mean be in this area. So they're saying if be good means do exactly what you're told all the time, which is the average parent's definition of being good, well, that's not what God expects of the child. That's just what the parents expect of the child. So that's an example of the parent's development defining the child's version of love.
And it is a real issue, isn't it, where you start to try to tune into the conscience and you confuse, is this just what mum and dad put into me through their emotional condition?
Correct.
And what is the actual conscience in operation? And because if you go back to where Jesus was talking about, basically we're saying that the disconnection from the mechanism from God comes through a desensitization of emotion. And you can see how in your childhood this was sort of a systematic thing, wasn't it? Where your parents were trying to get you to align with their emotional condition, which caused you to have to detune or desensitize from many of the experiences that the conscience was signaling to you was wrong. You can see that in order to get back in touch with the conscience, there's going to have to be a resensitization to emotion, and partly going through some feelings of, sometimes it feels a little bit or a lot distressing or upsetting that you're in a space where you think, is this fear of mum and dad, or is this the conscience? And that's an emotional process that we talked about a little bit in Austria, of going through that, just working through it as a process, that it's not necessarily going to be a magical connection back to the conscience immediately. Yeah.
Can I just ask?
Yeah.
Is that standard of love to do with divine love, or is it to do with human love? Like
Both. Both, yes. So let's look at, because let's write one other thing in here, because which I need to also say. Beliefs, your foundation of beliefs help you establish new beliefs. So your foundation of what you believe is factual, establish what you then believe on top of that will be factual, right? And quite often what you're told is factual that are lies, then determine how much fact you're going to also receive in the future, right? But in terms of the areas of your life, you can see that there's areas of life, there's a spiritual area of life, which I'd classify as all of your principled beliefs, right? Then there's the emotional areas of your life. What are all the emotions you were taught to have? Then there's the sexual development area of your life. What sexual beliefs do you have? What have you taken on sexually? As feelings as well as beliefs. And when I say beliefs, I mean emotional feelings related to spiritual beliefs. So in other words, is it wrong to have sex with lots of people, lots of different people? Is a spiritual principle, not necessarily a sexual one. Do you follow me? And then there's also physical things that have happened in your life that have an effect on your belief system as well, right? So there's all those areas of life, and for the most part, we've been trying to simplify for most people the areas of your life down to those four primary areas, because that's where the four primary experiential things are for you, in terms of what's happening in your life. And in every one of these areas, what's happened is your parents have had a set of beliefs in harmony with love that are this, you could say, why disharmony with love really, but in harmony with that version of what they believe to be love, which from God's perspective is actually quite evil, right? That's where your parents are. Now, when it comes to the reception of love, God, there's two parts for love, isn't there? We can receive love from God and therefore receive God's standard of love, which will include the standard of love of how we love others, but it'll also include the standard of love of how we love ourselves and love God. Right? It'll include all of those things. Alternatively, we can develop a standard of love based on human concepts, right? But it's still, God has established them as a standard as to how humans should love each other and love themselves. And those standards God imposes on the universe through law without God being involved in the sense of directly involved in educating the human. Right? So he's directly involved with the conscience in the sense of sharing the truth about them, but he's not directly involved in the feelings, because to be directly involved in the feelings would be opposite the law of free will. So you can only receive feelings from God if you choose to receive them, and that's an act of free will that you must make a choice. But you can receive facts from God whenever you just ask. Now, obviously, it's an act of free will still, but you just have to ask and receive, and you don't have to have a relationship with God even to do that. That's a loving relationship, I mean. You just need to be open to the idea that God's the universal creator and he knows truth, and I can find out what that truth is. Right? Not a more emotional feeling of he's my father or mother, but more of a feeling that he's my creator, and so I can ask. Right? So God wants to share truth on every level and love on every level with us. He wants and the standard is established by God on how humans should love humans, how you should love your children, how you should love your parents, how you should love your family, how you should love socially in friendships, and all of those things are defined by God. Already by law, they're defined. So the law is like a big structure that creates a strong definition of what is morally right when it comes to love in every aspect of your life. Make sense?
Yeah, there's so much to it, isn't there? Like it feels that there's so much, but
there is so much to it, yes.
And I'm assuming God's love is principled love, it's based on principle love, isn't it?
No. God's love for all of humanity is based on principle.
So the laws that govern our existence
That's all
are based on God's principled love. So he principally wants to create an environment for us that's easy to live in, that has easy to learn,
peaceful,
how to become happy, that there's consequences so that we can learn from our actions and understand free will. So that's God's principled love. But when we long for God's love and receive it, that's a very personal
That's
love.
his personal
That's
love.
God's affection for you.
That's God's affection for just you.
Just him. Yeah.
Just him. Yeah.
Like I feel so far removed.
Yeah, most people do. And that's why that's one of the things we want to talk about is how to get more in contact with God's personal love for you. So there's something we would like to discuss with you this weekend, actually, is to how because most of us, when we think of God, we think of some far off being who just created everything, really powerful, infinitely knowing, and then we go, well, why would that be in one like me, like one of billions of others? Like, what does that being feel about me? It's like, for the average person, they're going, well, I don't even know if he knows I exist, let alone has feelings for me. And this is where the personal love comes in.
It's kind of like that. It's very hard to have a concept. And like when I see you and Mary, like you can see me there. But with God, it's just...
Correct. And that's the difficulty most people have opening their heart to God. Because it's very hard to open your heart to somebody you don't have a correct concept about, isn't it? So that's something we would like to discuss with you this week.
Yeah. That's why we talk so much.
So, yeah.
Isn't it?
Yeah.
Because Jesus often says, it's when you make that connection with God, so many questions are just answered about God's nature. But so many of us are operating under so many misconceptions about God that make that first connection really a big deal and something that's many times feels out of reach until we work on our faith, we work on our humility. And that's why we talk all about all of these things, to try and help open that way.
Yeah.
Because once you have that connection with God, you really, if you're steady and strong and want that, you don't need to hear any more. You might want to, but you might want to hang out, but you don't really need all of the talking as much anymore.
Yeah. If we look at this diagram, one of the biggest effects the earth being in this condition has had is that this condition is far removed from a concept of God that is truthful. Does that make sense to you? Yeah, so here it's a hellish concept of God, right? So when we look at a hellish concept of God, we see things like God's going to punish you for every single little tiny thing you've done for the rest of your existence, just like a mum or a dad might do. That's a hellish concept of God. God is vindictive, is a hellish concept of God. God will destroy the wicked, which is said in the Bible and in the Quran, both holy books, supposedly about God. And yet they are hellish concepts of God. God doesn't destroy wicked, he redeems them. He corrects them. That's what he does with them. So completely different concepts of God exist here than what is the God standard in terms of the truthful concept of God. Right? Now, it's the spiritual beliefs that you have imbibed from childhood that have the largest effect on your life. The very largest effect. Most people don't realise that, We've been teaching for many, many years publicly, and for many years, all I was doing was answering people's questions about their own emotional problems and their own lives. And the majority of people do not understand that most of our problems begin with a spiritual principle. And then they turn into emotional, sexual, and physical problems. But, so physical problem is like a sickness. An emotional problem is what causes the sickness. Sexual problem is oftentimes, again, a concept that is based on some spiritual principles that are flawed. And most people don't realise that the majority of the things we choose to do fundamentally at the physical, sexual and emotional levels of our life, the actions we take, are actually based upon some very foundational spiritual beliefs that we actually have imbibed because we've lived in an earth that's far removed from God's standard of love. Yeah. And this is something we'll talk about a bit in the coming days when we give examples of some beliefs. Now, when we talk about spiritual beliefs, the average person goes, well, isn't that just like my spiritual concept of God? For example, like God is some energy system, like might be a spiritual concept of God. And then God is a triune God, like the Christian view of the average Christian view of God. Or the Muslim view of God is an individual, right? Is another spiritual concept of God. And then you've got the Hindu concepts of God, which are God is many gods. And then you've got the Buddhist concept of God, which is I am God. Does that make sense? Like all of us are God. And if you think about it, there are so many concepts of God presented on earth, and every one of them contains hellish concepts, like completely out of harmony with love. Every one of them. And yet we've grown up in a system that has accepted many of these beliefs as actually real. And in fact, there are billions of people on earth who have various concepts of God, right the way through to atheism. There is no God. Right the way through to Christian, Muslim, Hindu, Buddhist, and other concepts of God. And all of them demonstrate the hellish condition that they came from. All of these concepts of God. Now, of course, if you have a concept of God that is factually inaccurate, and you've imbibed that as an emotional feeling, that you believe it to be true, it's going to be very hard to establish a relationship with God as a result. And this is why we've been talking about God's standard of love, because unless we can start to see that the standard that's being imposed upon you spiritually, emotionally, sexually, and physically with your day-to-day life is actually very flawed, and also see that even the beliefs you now have that are internal to you, emotionally internal to you, are also very flawed. Unless you can grasp that, then you're not going to make a lot of progress in terms of receiving God's love, because your flawed concepts of God are going to be projected at God. And therefore, instead of feeling a feeling of longing for God, you're going to feel either angry with God, or feel like God's far off, or you'll feel like, why would I want a connection with God who's a punishing God? You have a lot of flawed concepts of God that then impose themselves upon you emotionally in such a manner that it closes you down to receiving what's on offer. And what's on offer is God is offering his love for you personally. He's offering that to each individual at the moment on the planet and also in the spirit world. And most people are not accepting it because of all of their earth-based standards of love, which are often about God, right, that prevent them from having that relationship ever being established. Yeah? Yeah. Could you come over, Talia?
So I was just wondering, when was the time that the concept of God was right? It's such a mess now.
It is a mess. It's an absolute nightmarish mess, the concept of God at the moment on earth. And also in the lower regions of the spirit world as well, in the hells of the spirit world, the concept of God is very seriously flawed as well.
You'd have to say when the right concept of God exists inside a person, the seventh sphere. It's pretty much when
the eighth sphere.
When you transition to the eighth sphere, is when you really get it right about God's nature.
Yeah.
So until that point,
until that time, you're going to have a wrong concept of God.
So even if you were to incarnate onto the earth in the sixth sphere, you still don't know God.
Yeah.
You don't, and you have to gain the right concept of God. So
you see, the sixth sphere is how you should love humans. So if you are in the sixth sphere, you know how to love people properly. And you also know how to love your environment properly at that stage, right? But you still don't know how to love God properly or how God loves you. You don't understand those things yet, right? And the perfect human can never really understand any of those things without receiving God's love, because it's God's love that changes your soul and therefore changes your mental concepts after it changes your soul into understanding how God loves. Right? So not going to understand those things to the eighth sphere of the spirit world. The problem is on earth, like you said, it's a terrible mess in terms of concepts of God. And the concepts of God are so distorted and so bad, and they've come from such an early time in our life. This is all, for most of us, our concepts of God were well and truly established by the time we were 7 years old. And those concepts of God have and continue to have a large impact on our desire to receive God's love, our desire to have a relationship with God on a personal level. And this is why, a part of awakening to our problems is awakening to the facts of life. And one of the facts of life is the earth is in the hells. That means that I've been educated by the hells. That's my education. And by the time I've become an adult, I am well educated and well entrenched in the beliefs of the hells. Yeah.
So besides this teaching, there's no other place on the planet that is teaching anything correct about God?
No. There are some truths in some areas. There are some concepts that are true, but then oftentimes there's big contradictions. Like the average Christian will say God is a God of love. But the average Christian also says you've got to fear God. But God's nothing to fear because God's only love, and He doesn't want us to have fear. He wants us to have love. He wants to be motivated by love. So when they say you're going to fear God, a completely false concept of God. The average Christian will say God will destroy the wicked. In fact, many Christians will say God will torment the wicked forever in hell. Now that is pretty bad when you think about it. That's like what a demon would do. Isn't it? When we concept of a demon is somebody who wants to just cause your pain for the rest of your existence. That concept of God is like demonic concept of God. It's an evil concept of God. And yet it's in a faith that claims that God is love. So there's all these contradictions about God, and the contradictions mean that internally, emotionally, we get contradicted as well. So we go, do I really want to have a relationship with that person who's willing to torment somebody for the rest of their existence? Like, would you want to have a relationship with somebody who's willing to torment a person for the rest of their existence? I don't know whether I would, right? And there's these hellish concepts of God that get imposed upon your attempts to have a relationship with God. And that's the problem, is that while these hellish concepts exist, I am going to impose them upon my relationship with God and also upon my relationship with everyone around me. Now, the only way I'm going to change from that is to awaken to the problem. To awaken to the problem requires a whole set of things for me that need to occur to me. We discussed the sort of general processes in England about what is required in the process of an awakening. But it starts with some level of intellectual awareness that there's a problem. And then it deepens from that into a point where we emotionally understand the problem to the extent that we release the problem and it's not a part of our lives anymore. Right? So this is very, very important, that we need to consider our concept of God, and our concept of loving others is so distorted that almost, unless we have progress to become at one with God, we're going to be very distorted on anything to do with standards with God, and particularly when we're in the hells, we're so far removed from that. And then when it comes to love of people, unless we've progressed to the sixth sphere of the spirit world in its equivalent on earth, which you can do, we won't understand what it means to love people either. Right? And we've got to come at some point to get rid of our own arrogance and our own self, denial and our own concept of ourselves, to the point where we go, yeah, I've been educated in this hellish system, which now has hellish views, hellish beliefs that are now that I actually have inside of me that are imposing themselves upon my life with my partner, my children, my family, the world around me, social construct, my country. It's all imposed upon me. Does that make sense? And so we need to, at some point, realise and be humble enough to go, this is where I am, most probably. And how fast I can get rid of many of these spiritual beliefs about love, because all the spiritual beliefs pertain to love, and also about God, the speed at which I can get rid of them, which is going to have to be done through experiencing them, not just thinking them. The speed at which I get rid of them will determine how fast I progress. For some people, that might be 1,000 years. For other people, that might be a few hundred years. For other people, it might be 20 or 30 years. But it just depends on my own desire to see, my own desire to become aware and awakened as to how far I will go. And it hardly has anything to do with anybody else, except we do need to find out what the false concepts are and what the truth is about love in particular and about God in order to make progress occur. Yeah.
It's just, with some people, let's say, that have different beliefs, let's say, whatever they are, and they're good people, so some of them would be in a different state than, like, they wouldn't be necessarily in the hells. I'm just trying to, I don't know, I'm just kind of interested in this.
No, I can't agree with that
No.
statement. Every false belief that is spiritual, that is in disharmony with God, is going to make you do very unloving things even though you're not aware of it. Right? An example of that is Second World War. Right? Most ministers were teaching their congregation that the men had to go to war to fight the evil of the Hitler's regime, the evil of socialism. Right? Now, many of the people who went thought they were good, doing a good thing. Of course, when they were there, they realised they weren't. Right? But they thought they were. Right? But the reality is, state-sanctioned murder is still murder at the end of the day, right? And this is where you end up with problems. So the average person who thought, this is an extreme example, the average person thought they were good, but doing very bad things because of their beliefs. And this is the trouble. And for many of us, most of us don't have a lot of confidence in the first incarnation. Most people don't have a lot of confidence in the spirit world. They don't have a lot of confidence that it even exists, right? And so many times they do everything they possibly can to save their own life and the lives of their children and their family, even if that means being very unloving in the process, right? Now, the average person thinks, I did it for my child, that it was an act of love. That's the hellish view of love. I did it for my child, so therefore it was an act of love. You know, I killed my child's abuser, or I killed my child murderer. It was an act of love on my part. This is what a mother or father does for their child. Right? That's the view, but it's a hellish view of love. Anything that is spiritually corrupt is going to cause other corruptions. You follow? So every false belief on earth is not only false, but also evil in its intent. And this is where most people and I don't agree with each other. Most people go, oh, but yeah, there's good people in every church or in every belief. They can't be good while they believe false things. No one can be good while you believe a false thing. All right? Now, of course, there's varying degrees of false things you might believe, which would then cause you to be more evil than someone else. Right? An example is, I met one New Age fellow, he said, it doesn't matter if people die because they're all going to have a spirit existence anyway. Right? And I said, well, what does that mean? He said, well, you know, they're all going to have a spiritual existence anyway, so it doesn't matter if you kill them or not. And I said, does that mean you would murder someone under some circumstances? He said, probably. Because of that spiritual belief. So this was a conversation I had probably 25 years ago with a man who had some New Age spiritual beliefs. And isn't that amazing? Can you see how the spiritual belief caused him to then say it's going to determine his actions? It's going to determine what he chooses to do. And your spiritual beliefs will have a very large effect on what you determine to do. So if you believe loving your child is more important than loving your partner, you will choose your child over your partner. If you believe loving your child or your partner is more important than loving somebody else's child, you'll choose your child over their child. If you believe that your life is less important than your child's, you will choose to sacrifice your life for your child. And all of those things are hellish versions of love. You follow? So the problem is the belief systems, so we're talking about these spiritual belief systems now. These belief systems that are spiritual will have a huge effect on what you choose to do and how much you nullify the conscience as a mechanism of keeping you in alignment with what is morally right. Because your belief system is going to go, well, if people are going to die anyway and they're going to live in the spirit world anyway, then what's the problem with me killing them now? Right? If you don't understand the full version of God's love and what it imposes, you will then use that reasoning to take actions upon it, even though it's a hellish reasoning. It's a reasoning that began in the hells. Yeah.
And can we also say that it doesn't just mean that because somebody comes to a Divine Truth seminar and they intellectually say, oh yes, I agree with all of that, that doesn't mean they're not in a hellish condition either. It's the actions that you take based on your emotional beliefs and the emotional beliefs themselves that define your condition. So it is possible for people to discover God's laws and to live in harmony with their conscience in various ways, and that will assist their condition. But generally, on the whole, everyone on earth is suffering from this terrible disconnection from the conscience and a terrible missing the mark of God's standard of love.
And that includes almost everybody who's ever heard of Mind Truth. Because a lot of the standards are not yet in their heart. The standards are just, oh yeah, I think this is the right thing to do. I think I can agree with that logically. But unless the standard is in your heart, when it comes to, push and shove, as they say, as it comes to actual life, what is in your heart is going to determine what you do, not what's in your head. So what you feel to do is what you will do, rather than, so you can see that unless I feel myself to be in this, and I am in this condition actually, and instead I think I'm there, but I'm actually there. There's some people in this room believe they're there, but they're actually here, right? And while I'm here, those feelings of this place, which are all the feelings I grew up in my whole childhood and everything, and also all the feelings I imbibed through my own actions, cause me to be here. Those feelings will define what I end up doing. So if I don't feel the standard of love, God's standard of love, with regard to my interaction with you, then I will act the way I feel, which will come from here towards you. So if my feelings towards women are, my mother taught me she taught me this way by giving me feelings that I'm a man, so therefore she will clean up after me, and she will do things after me, and she will make my meals, and she kept doing that my whole teenage life as well, all the way through my childhood, teenage life. So this is a physical thing I'm raising. It's just with regard to making of meals and looking after my body, if you like. And she taught me that this is love. This is mum loving me. Right? So that's a hellish version of love, by the way. But she's taught me that's love. And in the process of teaching me that's love, I now have inside of me a feeling, this is how a woman loves me. A woman who loves me, who says she loves me, will do a whole heap of physical things for me. She'll tidy up my clothes after me. She'll wash my clothes. She'll iron them. She'll do my cooking. She'll do my cleaning up after me. That's one of the things she'll do. Right? It's a hellish version of love, but I'm going to have it inside of me. Right? My mum has it on the giving side, and I have it on the receiving side. Right? Now, in me on the receiving side, what am I going to do? The next time I have a relationship, so let's say I find my girl, have a relationship with her, how is she, my definition of love for Mary will be, she's got to cook for me, she's got to clean for me, she's got to, do all of those things that my mum did, because my mum loves me the best. Right? And mum is going, I don't like your wife, because she doesn't cook for you and she doesn't clean for you. Doesn't she know this is how you love me? Right? So mum's even supporting him in his damaged version of love with his partner. Even his mum's supporting him. And so he's going, because you don't do that, you're not as nice as my mum. My mum's the only woman who really loves me, which is what the mum wants to feel. But it's not love. It's not love because you've taught him to become reliant and abusive to other women. Reliant upon and abusive too. That's not love. It's not. So it's a hellish version of love. And yet, how many mothers have that with their sons? The majority have that with their sons.
And daughters.
And daughters. Yeah, and daughters. But often with the sons, because there's also the additional codependent thing is I'm going to turn my son into being better than his father. There's also that, and so the son grows up believing he's better than every other man as well in the process. And it creates huge problems in their later life, all because the spiritual belief comes from the hills. You follow? So a lot of people, what you would define as good, God defines as evil. Because God's definition of love is much higher than yours. Makes sense? And this is the problem we face on earth. I'm not saying this from a point of judgment. We've got to come to terms with the fact that this is the facts of how things are. If I want to make a progress with love, which is the whole goal really, if you think about our life, if we progress in love, we will be happier, we'll be more content, we'll be more peaceful, we'll help others more. We'll also be more loving to ourselves. We'll also have the higher potential of receiving God's love because we've awakened to much of the false beliefs about love as well. If I can do that, then my growth is dependent upon me accepting that where I currently am is highly distorted and very evil compared to where God would like to see me be. Yeah. And this is why when we say, oh, but people are good, I can't agree. I see people doing many evil things from God's standard. Now, I'm not saying that you can't get out of that. And I'm not saying that you're permanently condemned because of that. What I'm saying is we all, humans all, have a responsibility to get out of that for ourselves. And if we all exercise that responsibility, the whole world is going to be better as a result of us exercising that responsibility. But if we all ignore from the beginning the fact that the earth is in the hells, and we all ignore from the beginning that I'm probably there too, right? Then how are we going to make change? We're basically ignoring the facts of where we begin, which we need to make adjustments to. Yeah.
Thank you.
Eva, and then down here. Just leave your hand up when you...
I had a question about conscience and how to awaken it in a specific area of life.
Yep.
And for me, it's actually my total anger and how I behave towards my man.
Well, towards everybody, really, but your man being the person living with you is probably the person who's going to receive the brunt of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And, well, I have touched on conscience on some areas, which I find is extremely helpful, but not on this one. It's just one. And so my question is, how do you get your conscience to actually wake up?
To be sensitive to what's going on. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, well, it's a good question, and it's something we probably want to talk more about. I'm not sure if I want to do it just right now while I'm presenting some facts about things, but it's something that we need to discuss more, isn't it? How to open the conscience to the point where you're sensitive to everything. But a clue to it is this. The conscience is driven through an emotional connection with the truth. So really what we're saying is there's certain areas where I don't want to hear the truth. Where I feel emotionally it's too hard or I just don't want to hear the truth from an emotional perspective. So when it comes to like treating somebody badly consistently, you obviously don't want to hear the truth about it from God. Does that make sense? Yeah. So what you would need to firstly do is start looking at why you don't want to hear the truth about it from God. And it's always related to these spiritual beliefs you hold. So the spiritual beliefs are going to be the most important thing to focus on. So there's spiritual beliefs in you that stop you from being emotionally open to hearing how you're treating Per is out of harmony with love. Does that make sense to you? They're spiritual beliefs, not just emotions from childhood or anything like that, but these are firmly established things that you believe are facts about how a man should act and about how a man should treat you. They've come from a lot of your father's treatment of you, right? Because you were educated in the hellish condition of earth about how a man should treat a woman or how a woman should treat a man. So with Per, you have two things going on. You've got firstly how you should get away with treating him, which is defined by the hellish beliefs, and then it's how he should treat you and he doesn't, and that's also defined by your hellish beliefs. Does that make sense?
The last one, I didn't get that. How he should.
Well, the one is how you treat him.
Yeah.
That's defined by hellish beliefs.
Yeah.
And the other one is how you think he should treat you. How you feel he should treat you is also defined by hellish beliefs. Now, unless you're prepared to examine these spiritual aspects of that, your emotions and other actions towards him physically, sexually and emotionally won't change. You've got to start examining what spiritual reasons or justifications, you could call them faiths, what faith, corrupt faith, do you have that causes you to believe that how you want him to act towards you and how you should be allowed to act towards him, right? You've got to allow yourself to look at both of those things and see where they're wrong and actually eventually feel that they're wrong. Unless you come to feel they're wrong, then your actions will not change, right? Also, unless you come to feel that you're able to cope emotionally with hearing from God about what God feels about that treatment, your conscience also won't open. Because your conscience is driven by the emotions you hold. And the way God's made your internal system, and this applies to everybody, is the highest things that affect your emotions are spiritual beliefs, not past emotions. So in other words, it's not you were taught emotionally that you should expect this. That's not the reason why you treat somebody badly. The real reason why you treat somebody badly is because you have some spiritual beliefs about love that are corrupt. And those spiritual beliefs about love cause you to feel certain emotions when you're interacting with a person.
So what would a spiritual belief be like? Just to get an example?
A man should do everything I want.
Is that a spiritual?
That's a spiritual belief.
Okay.
It's not yet an emotion. It's just a belief. You follow? But it's emotionally based. This is what you feel. A man should do everything I want.
Or even
He should make my fear go away. Another one. He should make me feel good about myself all the time. Another one. He should make me. He should do a whole heap of things that actually, from God's perspective, he doesn't have to do it all. Right?
Even higher than that is the belief. If a person doesn't meet my definition of love, then I'm allowed to be angry with them. That's a spiritual belief.
That's a spiritual belief.
So
It's not my anger is justified. That's a spiritual belief. See, there's one thing to have anger, which is an emotion. There's another thing to believe it's righteous. That's a spiritual belief.
yeah, that's right.
Yeah. So for most people, when they're angry, their spiritual belief is I'm justified in my anger and I should visit it upon others.
So there's
well.
in their spiritual beliefs about equality, where you feel superior to someone, or you feel, like I was saying, when you have a definition of love that isn't met, then you feel like, well, then all bets are off. I'm allowed to behave however I want because my definition of love was not met.
Yeah.
Those things are spiritual beliefs. They're saying this is the way the universe should operate. If you think about it, you're trying to create your own spiritual law, which is if love isn't met, according to my definition, then anger is okay. Yeah.
Does that make sense to everyone?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
Now-
so much want to change something. I think I want to change.
No, the person who doesn't change doesn't want to change.
No.
So it's another false
That's right.
belief.
Yeah.
If you keep saying you want to change but you don't change, then you've got to start facing you don't want to change and why. Why don't you want to change? It's because there's corrupt faith, there's corrupt beliefs that are spiritual in nature that are driving your actions. And unless you address them, nothing is going to change. And also, unless you sincerely look at them, you're not even going to want to change them. And in fact, unless you can even identify them, you're not even going to know what to change in order to change them.
So it's such a good point Jesus makes, because often we say, I want to change this thing, but that statement is usually coming from, there's really bad effects happening in my life that are unpleasant and I don't like them. I'd like to not have the effects,
But I
but
still want to do the thing.
we haven't really examined what needs to change for the effects to change, because we still want to keep those things, those spiritual beliefs. So when you get to the point where you can you kind of can feel emotionally, these are the spiritual beliefs that I have and I feel they're a problem, I want to change them, then you can start a process of change. but it takes work to get from the pain of these painful effects to wanting to even know what are the spiritual beliefs driving my precious spiritual beliefs that I think are wonderful, actually.
That are all coming from the hell.
From my hellish education, but I value them very much. Otherwise, I wouldn't keep doing all these things. Yeah, so it takes work to get to the desire to want to know what they are, and then to change them means you change your attitude towards them emotionally.
Yeah. So you're right with that?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes.
Good. Let's go across here next and then.
Hi. Thanks. Thanks, as you have progressed in self-love, you have to have been remembering some positive affirmative relation with the conscience, instances of relationship with the conscience that in a natural way pass. Those rememberings sort of is a question, sort of nurture the arrogance of one, because we can say, for example, I think, in my arrogance last month, I have been remembering basically a good positive reaffirming moment in my infancy of interaction with the conscience. I thought.
Yeah.
But it's a bit arrogant because you have made this example of the stolen. And then I have to. But I don't know.
Do you understand?
Well, say that question. Sorry. The thing is.
Do you want to say it in Spanish?
No, might not understand the Spanish accent. You have to go very slow. But
you have remembered, I'm sure of that, many instances of the past of yours in your progress in self-love.
Yeah.
When you as having received already God's love,
yeah.
You are not behaving in that memories like a natural spirit, because you can feel that was the conscience and not you. For example, the guy that were right in this interaction with God, because an spirit can say, the adult in that occasion, when I had 7 years old, when I was 7 years old, the adult in that conversation has no reason, had no real reason. I was the guy.
Can I stop you? Can I stop you and just see if I can rephrase your question back to you and we'll see if we're on the right track.
Yeah.
So there's a few things you're saying. So you're saying when you were little, somebody harmed you, but you have a memory of feeling that wasn't my fault. That you just remembered.
It was wrong that
it was wrong.
It was a conversation about progress means distraction.
Yeah. Hang on. I'm not finished summarising. That's one point though. That's one point though, wasn't it? Just you had this memory recently that you had an experience when you were a child, and you were being harmed, but you remembered the conscience sort of giving you a prompting. This wasn't my fault, or I'm not to blame here. Is that one thing you said?
No, the reason is by my side, not by the side of others. The reason in a conceptual like progress doesn't mean distraction at all. So to progress, you do not require distraction at all.
Distraction.
The distraction or
destruction?
Distraction.
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 Like get rid of.
Because
destroy.
Make nature go back, go worse.
Yeah.
That is our
So
civilization.
Just stop now.
Yeah.
Just wait.
Yeah. But you're asking also Jesus if in his progression he has remembered times in the past when he was a child, when he felt the conscience working, telling him he was not to blame.
Or he had the reason and not the adult.
Yes, he was correct and not the adult. Yes. You're asking if he had memories like that?
Of God.
Or me?
Okay.
Yep.
And then with the touch of God's love, is maybe the divine love touch is so fast because of that, because you remember God, not I remembering you yourself. I feel that I am correct here, or I'm not to blame. No.
Well,
this
there's two. Hang on,
Yeah,
there's
that's
two-
not
there's
sort of how it
two- no.
works. Can I
There's
sort
two
of describe
mechanisms
how it
we're talking
works?
about,
The
yeah.
conscience.
And the difference between what receiving God's love feels like and the conscience.
The
in
conscience-
terms of telling you.
The conscience
Right and
is
wrong.
not I am right or wrong. It's not that, ever. It's God is right. Right? So the mechanism of the conscience is not about you working out or being told that you are right. The mechanism of the conscience is God telling you what he says is right. They're very different things. We had this conversation with people in England as well, that they were starting to say, but then I can tell myself I'm right. And so that's not how it works. How it works is God is saying, this is what's right. And he's saying it through the mechanism of your conscience. So basically what he's doing is he's saying to you, this is what is right and this is what is wrong. That's the mechanism of the conscience. So when you do something, even before you do something, right or wrong, God can say, this is what is right and this is what is wrong. Even when you just even think of doing something, God can say, this is what is right and this is what is wrong. Right? And God's saying, this is right from my perspective. This is wrong from my perspective. It's God's perspective, not yours. So you see, the problem is if it was yours, we're brought up in the hills, and so most of our perspectives are already distorted. And if it was just your perspective, the conscience would already be distorted. But the conscience is a cleanly working mechanism that works under all circumstances except when you detune emotionally. Right? It works under all those circumstances. So it's not I am right or wrong. It is God is right. This is what God says is right, or this is what God said is wrong. Right? So when you say, like questioning about our lives, when we hear the conscience properly, what you hear is not what you believe is right or wrong, or what you feel is right or wrong, but what God feels is right or wrong. And they are very, very different things.
And then I believe the extension of the question is, how does that change when you receive God's love? Does that speed up the process or does that strengthen your connection with the conscience? Is that what you're getting at?
More or less. But in your experience, you can show some example of memory of a positive, affirmative interaction with God that you rejected in that moment, then as coming from God, the universe rejected, or we all have rejected that, isn't it? We all have rejected.
So you're talking about as a child sort of remembering rejecting the conscience, giving you a signal about what is right and wrong.
A signal that, because our whole development in cellular, we cannot absorb because of.
Let's just stop.
Yes.
I think we understand the question well enough. So it's
We understand the theme.
Yeah, we understand the theme of it. The main thing is this. To get this stage to the stage where I can receive something from God about whether it is right or wrong, I have to have an emotional openness to the truth God is trying to share with me. So in other words, if I've got feelings in me or beliefs in me that say, I don't want to hear that, I don't want to hear that from God, that thing that God's saying is going to be, if I act upon that, it's bad. If I act upon that, my parents won't like me. Or act upon that, the world's not going to like me some way. Or if I act upon that, I've got to feel some things, and I don't want to feel some things. So you can see, every time I shut down emotionally, then of course I'm shutting down my conscience, and then God can't share with me on that subject what is right and what is wrong, right? So in order for me to not reject what is coming from God, I have to get to a state where I'm prepared to feel my emotions about anything God may share. So if God says, in this state where you're a child, for example, and God is saying how you're getting treated now is wrong, now that's a truth that God can share. The child, if it's emotionally closed to that truth, so in other words, the child may have previous abuse history, which says to the child that the child is to blame for the abuse. In other words, that when a child is treated bad, it may already believe by that stage that the reason why it's treated bad is because mum and dad think he is bad. Now, under those circumstances, he'll have some emotion which say, I am bad. So when God says, no, you're not bad, mum and dad are bad, the child won't accept it. Because the emotion inside is saying, no, I am bad. Right? And so therefore I can't accept God telling me that I don't have to be bad, that I'm not bad.
And this is very common for people who have been abused to grow up and feel that self-love, which is what you're also asking about, loving myself, having self-regard, there's now a feeling of threat associated with that. There's a feeling of fear. That's dangerous if I do that, which causes us to further detune from conscience as we grow.
Yeah. So the detunement from the conscience can not only just be caused by our own desire to not know truth, but it can also be caused by, and mostly is caused by, our own desire to not feel emotions once we know the truth. So once you know a truth, you will then feel like you have to act upon it. And for many of us, we don't want to act upon truths, and so we'd rather not know them. It's easier to not know them than it is to know them and then not act upon them. Like, as soon as you know something, it's much harder to not act upon it. So if I am going in I am in my system going, I don't want to feel something, then many of us then also go, well, I don't want to know about it either. Right? I don't want to know it either. So God is just sharing what God knows with us here through an emotional process. It's right or it's wrong. And I am going, well, I don't want to know that. I don't want to know that because I've got feelings that I'd have to feel if I know that, or I've got actions I might have to take. I might have beliefs I may have to get rid of. I may have to take some actions that I would prefer, that I feel are going to be dangerous in my future. So actions that are also that I don't want to take. And so because of that, I've got emotions that go, don't do that. Beliefs, spiritual beliefs that say, if I do that, I'm going to be harmed. So rather than us thinking, if I do something in harmony with God's truth, I'll be protected by God's law, we go, if I do that in the world, in the hells, I'm going to get harmed. Right? That's how we see it. And so we start then going, I don't want to know what God is right, what God feels is right. I want to know that I am right. Because I am right to resist my feelings. I am right to save myself. I am right to believe in fear. I am right to believe that if I act in a hellish world, then my situation will be worse rather than better. I am right believing all these things. So I'd like to believe I am right. And then most people then start calling that the conscience.
But you were right to refer to that as an arrogance. That is, and as a child, very often the circumstances are very extreme in the child's perception. In order, for example, life-threatening to receive the truth that actually God feels I'm not to blame in this situation that I'm in. But in that process of giving up that feeling, it is almost like the inception of arrogance, isn't it? Because then we start to believe we have to live in that belief that we are to blame. And then before you know it, we get to this state where Jesus talking about as an adult, where we're saying, I am right about this not self-love, I'm not loving myself. And that is...
Can I maybe give an example from my first century life? Right? My father, Joseph, believed that I was the coming Messiah. He felt he was told by an angel that I was, and so he actually believed that I was the Messiah that was foretold in the Hebrew scriptures of our teachings, the Jewish faith. Now, so that's what he believed. Now, so that sets the scene. Now, quite often I got feelings that were contradictory to my father's feelings. So quite often I got feelings that my father was wrong. So my father, this happened very young age, like 5 or 6 years old, I could feel my dad was wrong. And I didn't have any fear associated with my father. So I told him he was wrong. Right? I told him he was wrong, and he beat me every single time. Like, I got beaten every single time I told him he was wrong. And that was like, in the end, it was daily, every single time. So my father, Joseph, beat me every single day almost of my life. Right? Because I would constantly tell him he was wrong. See, the average child under that circumstance, given the fact that I'm brought up in a hellish environment, would go, I just accept that I'm either wrong, or if Dad's wrong, don't say anything. At least that, right? But I couldn't accept that. The conscience, my connection with God didn't allow me to accept that. And so it meant I get beaten every day. When I was around 7 years of age, I was sent to a school for soldiers. And I was there for 2 years because my father thought he couldn't beat me into submission. Maybe they could. Right? And the soldiers came back 2 years later. So this was in Egypt. The soldiers came back 2 years later and told my father, we have to beat him to death because he's not going to change. So by the time I was 9, my father knew he could not stop me from saying, like, what the truth was, except by killing me. Right? And he didn't want to kill me because he believed I was the Messiah. Right? Now, if he didn't believe I was the Messiah, he may have had a very different idea. He might have chosen to kill me instead. I was considered to be a disobedient child by the average Jew. Yeah. And this is why, as I grew up, many of my peers wanted to do the same as my father did with me, because I couldn't stay silent, and I couldn't just concede that an error was not the error. I couldn't just accept it as truth. Right? Now, you can see, and I had a lot of spiritual protection as a result of living in harmony with the Lord. Myself living in harmony with the Lord. So that's what kept me alive. Right? There's many times I would have died before I was even in my teenage years. There was many times I could have died just because of that one thing that I couldn't let the truth go. Right? With regard to any matter. Now, the average child nowadays is brought up in the state, all right, the same state my father attempted to bring me up, in the state which says, your mum and dad are upset with you. You just damn well shut up. Even if you think differently, you at least don't say anything, because that would be disobedient. That would be not loving to your parents, right? So the average child is brought up to be thinking that way right from the beginning. The only difference is by this stage I had a connection to God that was strong enough to go, I can't agree. No matter what happens to me, I can't agree. Now, you can see from that example that if the child is allowed to speak the truth and stay in harmony with the conscience, then it's unlikely the child will ever separate from the conscience in its life. But if the child is beaten into submission every day, constantly criticised, constantly pulled down, and there is an openness to receiving that, which has already been established by the parents, then it's highly likely the child, by the time it's a teenager, will have a lot of compromises with their own conscience. Because they're going to hear the truth, but at the same time go, I can't follow it, without potentially dying. I can't follow it. So the average person will sacrifice their conscience for the sake of social acceptance. Right? And that causes, that's just another emotion, that causes the conscience to not operate. So now, even though the conscience is there, the mechanism is there, it should be working and will remain working, but because of the emotion which says, I could die if I followed my conscience. Because of that emotion, the average person won't follow it. Right? Fear of death, fear of there not being an afterlife, fear of pain and suffering, the average person will not follow their conscience. We've got to get to a stage where we will follow our conscience, whatever. That's how you keep the flow of truth between you and God, by following it, whatever. Now remember, some of the truths are just factual. They're just like how the universe works, how things work, how, why is the sky blue type of facts, But other things are much more emotionally connected with spiritual beliefs. Like, is it right to believe God is a God of war? Is it right to believe God is a God of, torture and people forever in hell? Is it right to believe that there is no God? These kind of spiritual beliefs will also come to me as well through the conscience. But if I believe that those things I receive through the conscience are going to cause damage to my life, then I will be very inclined to no longer listen to the conscience. Right? And that's the thing to bear in mind when it comes to the operation of the conscience, is if you stay in harmony with the fact that God created you to deal with any emotion, He created you to deal with any experience, He created you to handle anything, that you're the pinnacle of His creation. He created you to handle everything that's going to come along in your life. And that if I follow my conscience, my life will always be in harmony with God's truth and laws, and therefore the most safe it can be. If I have that feeling, which is a spiritual belief, then I will keep my conscience open. But if I have spiritual beliefs that tell me the opposite to that, then I'll be very tempted to close down my conscience and its operation more and more and more, to the point where I'm totally numb to it. And I don't even know that it happens. And I can't hear a single feeling from God about any matter. Right? And unfortunately, that's where the majority of us have gone, even in our childhood. Because we were pushed in that direction through experience, and particularly through the experiences with our parents. The problem is that we have then done a thing to substitute the conscience, which is arrogance. And that really is, I am right. Or more specifically, I know what's right and wrong. Right? That's arrogance. With the condition of arrogance, we do it to protect our emotions. We do it to protect our actions. We do it to protect our experience. But we don't understand that now we have completely divorced our life from our conscience. So now we cannot hear God at all on any truthful matter. And as a result of that, everything will be determined by what I just think is right or wrong. And the problem with that, of course, is most of the things I think are right and wrong are so far removed from God's standard of love that they're unrecognisable from the love perspective. Right? So this is the problem most of us face, is that we enter on earth, most people enter this state of total sort of arrogance and self-absorption as a tool to get away from the emotions associated with the conscience operating and then taking actions in harmony with it. That's all we need to say, I think, about it. Maybe, we'll see. Let's see how we go. Can we go to Nelly and then straight back over there?
So it's related to this. since teenage years, I started to feel quite bad about myself. Like I had to improve myself, and I was not good enough. So the day before yesterday, I asked God how God.
Nelly, can we focus on the principles?
Yeah. It's related to the principles, I think.
Well, I would like to leave it open to everybody's personal experience after a break.
Okay.
I just want to focus on the principles because the main thing is we focus on the principles now, and then we can open it to everybody to discuss those principles. Does that make sense? But I haven't really finished the principles. So, yeah. Is your question related to principles? I need the lady behind. Yep. Can you pass the mic back there? Thanks.
So on the topic of conscience, you were saying that you should always speak the truth from the conscience.
Yep.
Not
your truth.
Right. Like, so you have to differentiate. Does it come from my conscience, or does it? But ultimately, what my question is leading to is, does it ever make sense to just realize the conscience, like just realize the truth from God for yourself, but not speak it in a specific moment because you think not the whole truth would be received? Maybe you would only share a part of it. Because you said you experienced so much beating from your father. And so I'm just wondering if that was all in harmony with love because you were speaking all the time. Because there was negative consequences to you sharing, but then you said, you're protected by the laws overall still, but you still experienced a lot of pain.
Yeah, but only because of the hellish condition of the earth.
Right.
It wasn't because of God, was it?
No, definitely not. I'm not saying that. I'm just wondering if it ever makes sense to not, because I have experience with friends, for example,
Can you just stop for a moment?
Yeah.
You know your fear is asking this question, don't you?
There's always.
Okay. So can you just reflect for a moment about fear? Is there ever a time, so this is a general thing which will answer every question I hope about fear that's ever asked. Of course that won't probably happen, but we'll see. Fear is what? Firstly, it's a feeling, isn't it? It's a feeling of panic and worry, and also, if it's developed to its full extent, terror about doing something, isn't it? That's what fear is, right? But it's also based upon false expectations appearing real. It's also based on not understanding truth. When you fully understand God's truth and you feel it, you don't feel afraid about anything. So the only reason why you wouldn't speak is when nobody in the room wants to hear you speak. It wouldn't be because there isn't something to say that should be said. So what I mean by that is, if you guys all felt very close to truth today, I would say, well, you all guys will go home, and I might as well go home too, and get a sleep instead, or do something more productive. Because if you're in a state where you're blocked to hearing the truth, then if I would honour your free will by saying the truth to you, that is, you're blocked to receiving truth, and so therefore it's not much point in me speaking it. But I would say at least that. Right? At least that truth. You follow? Because that is the truth. So sometimes my dad will ask me my opinion. I say to my father, you don't want to hear my opinion. It disagrees with yours. And the last time it disagreed with yours, you belt me. So you don't want to hear my opinion. Do you want to hear my opinion or not? My opinion is not going to change. It doesn't matter how much you belt me, it's not going to change either. But I was willing to say to him, it's not the same as his opinion. Right? The problem that most of us have is we get this fear and it becomes a terror in us, and then we go, now I'm justified living in this location. I am justified believing what everybody else believes in this location rather than believing what God says is true.
What I meant is that inside of me, I would still have a connection with the conscience, though.
No, you don't. I'm sorry, you don't. You say you do, but you don't. In that state, you don't. I understand what you're trying to say. Don't think I don't. I understand completely what you're trying to say. You're trying to say that while you're being, speechless in a certain situation, like in a situation you're deciding to not speak, right? Deciding not to speak up. You're saying you have a connection with the conscience. But if you had a proper connection with the conscience would never allow you to be in a state where you would not speak.
Well, it depends if I'm not speaking out of fear or if I'm not speaking because it feels like the loving thing to do in that moment.
It's always a loving thing to speak if you know the truth. There's never a time when it's
that
not.
answers my question.
Never a time when it's not. And so this idea that I can be in harmony with my conscience privately, but not publicly, is completely false, and it actually proves you're not in harmony with your conscience, even privately. Do you see what I mean?
Yes.
Yeah. So the conscience isn't even working privately, because you can't have a full connection with God while you decide to live in this place, but also while you believe things, spiritual beliefs that are out of harmony with God's truth. And one spiritual belief that is out of harmony with God's truth is, I can have the truth for myself, but I don't need to share it. God's laws demand you share it. God's laws say it's an act of love that you share it. If you could understand myself and Mary's life, on the average, I've probably received, a few hundred death threats every year. Right? And these are people who are willing to come to our home and kill me, harm Mary as well, by the way. And we get this on a regular basis. Right? Now, why do I keep doing it? Because it's right to share the truth, no matter how many people threaten my life, no matter how many people want to kill me. It's right to share the truth. Right? So fear is not going to govern me, even if I am afraid. There are times when I do feel still afraid, but I'm going, well, it's not going to govern me, because if I'm in harmony with the conscience, I must ignore my fear and just do what is right. When I say ignore my fear, I don't mean ignore it in the sense of not feel it. I mean feel it, go through my fear, but also act in harmony with what I know the truth to be. That must be done. And if I believe that there's any circumstance where the truth shouldn't be shared, then I'm out of harmony with the conscience. Because the reality is God feels that there's every circumstance the truth should be shared. Right? With everyone, if you can. But if you can't with everybody, then with everybody who will listen is the best course of action, right?
Because of course you're educated in the principles of free will as well, aren't you?
Of course.
You're not going to force
I'm not going to
things.
compromise free will. I'm not going to force people to hear the truth. But in my company, you're going to hear it. you know what I mean? Like, you're in my company. It's going to be what I say. Like, and it's going to be pretty tricky sometimes, because a lot of what I say is pretty tricky. Because it's pretty tricky for me too. Because it's God's truth and not necessarily mine at times, and so it's pretty tricky for me too. Like I go, wow, do I need to do that? And the answer is always yes. Like, you remember with God, the conscience, He can say yes, like no, yes. We talked about this in England a lot, about how to develop the conscious sensitivity. And this is an answer to your question, Eva. There's things you can do, like just asking yes or no questions of God is one way to start developing the conscience more. And God can tell you, yeah, it's a good thing. It's a great thing. This is a pretty tricky situation, but it's a great thing to say the truth. Right? There's not a single circumstance in your life that would require you to stay silent. Even though the hellish view of the world in love is, there's many, but the hellish view is you pretty much stay silent most of the time, and you only speak up when it becomes very harmful to you. That's the hell view. The hell view is, as long as it's not hurting you, then don't bother speaking up. That's the world's view and the hell's view. The truthful view is I need to speak up in every circumstance I can, right? And if somebody puts tape over my mouth, obviously I'm not going to be able to speak up. If somebody puts me in solitary confinement, obviously I'm not going to be able to speak up. There are certain circumstances in life where it's not going to be possible for me to speak up, right? But those circumstances are all very extreme and also out of my control. When it's in my control, I'm going to speak up. That's what my conscience will tell me to do. Yeah. And this is the thing, is that when we're connected to the conscience, our emotions and our beliefs and even our sensory things like, but what if somebody stabs me or kills me or tries to harm me? Too bad. Like, truth is more important than my life. My earth life. Truth is more important than that. If I know the truth and I really believe it too, I would know I have a spirit life straight after this earth life. And so if I stay in harmony with the truth, I know, and I die for that truth, my spirit life's going to be better than if I died for a lie or died for withholding the truth. It'll be better. So it's better that I share it from a spirit life as well. So when I understand the truth spiritually, I will find that I have less emotional impediments to the operation of the conscience. Yeah? There are no circumstances in your life where truth should not be shared, if it's within your power to do so. Not a single one. And that includes you thinking, somebody says, oh, you told the truth and it harmed my life. No, the truth never harms a person's life. Covering over the truth harms people's lives, but the truth never harms a person's life. So let's say, somebody comes to me and says, where are you hiding? I want to kill you. They want to kill you, right? And they come to me and, do you know where they're hiding? I'll say, yeah. Are you going to tell me? No. Because the intention of the person is to harm you. Why would I tell them? Right? But I'm telling the truth still, aren't I? Am I going to tell him? No. He can kill me. I'm not going to tell him. Got a gun to my head. Not going to tell him. You follow? Now, the average person would go, gun to my head now. What am I going to do? Most people will compromise. That's why gun to your child's head. Tell me where they are. What are you going to do? The average person would go, tell him, save your child. No, I know my child's going to have a spirit life. Why would I tell? There's no motivation to tell because the condition of love is such that I understand the truth about spirit life. I understand where my child is going to go if the person shoots him. I understand.
Well, you also understand the spiritual principle that your child's life is not more important than yours.
I know my spiritual principle. My child's life is not more important than yours or mine. And what if he says, I'm going to shoot all your family, and he shoots all my family? Too bad. All of my family's lives are not more important than yours. Right? And the average person on earth doesn't believe any of these things because the average person on earth lives here. Not God's standard of life. Right? And this is what I'm saying is that you're going to be many times in the confrontation between God's standard and your own. Many times you're going to want to justify your own standard. Many times. And it's only going to be because of false spiritual beliefs that you even choose to justify your own. So it's going to be because of that. So my recommendation is to just God's truth, stay in contact with it all the time. If I want God's truth and I want it more than anything else, my conscience will stay open. If I'm willing to deal with any emotion that requires keeping my conscience open, I will. And as long as I do that, the conscience is going to inform me, God will inform me through the conscience of every circumstance in my life. And every single decision and choice I make will be instant and easy. Instant and easy. There won't be worries. But I won't be worried when someone's got a gun to my child's head. I won't be worried. Yeah, not because I'm callous, but because I know what's going to happen to the person who murders him, and I also know what's going to happen to him. Right? Because I know the truth. Because God's told me. And if I have some trust in that, then I can live my life in peace, and I can live my life in eternal tranquility. Yeah. Inside me, not worried. Yeah. That's it? Yeah. Yeah. And what's the time? Must be fairly good. After 1. Yeah. You have a break.
I have a question about God's love.
Yeah.
I always thought I had a connection with God in one way or another since early childhood. And then several years ago, now I feel from your explanations that I actually experienced that love. Things happened to me, like it was an instant, rapid growth. It wasn't just like moving from my 20s to my 30s. It was an expansion of consciousness, understanding, seeing things clearly.
Mm-hmm.
And then I understood that I had no connection with God before. It was just me covering what I wanted to see and just excluding whatever I didn't want to see.
Yeah.
So this process started, and as soon
when,
as
when did it start?
2019-20, during the date or after what?
And what was the trigger?
Trigger, I heard someone who I loved.
Yeah.
Emotionally.
Yeah.
For me, when things happen.
And then how did you feel about that?
Powerful.
Yeah.
I came to my lowest threshold of disgust of myself.
Yeah.
And this is when I turned to God truly.
Yeah. And what did you do to turn to God?
I don't know. I quit my job, I locked myself up, and I started praying.
Yeah.
Having this dialogue.
Yeah.
And then everything was out of my control. I don't know how things happened.
Yeah.
So as they started progressing, I was shown what I was going to do with my big soul project, let's say, on this earth. Yeah. And of course, I became...
Can I stop you now?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're in a personal question, not
but something I must say. What you're experiencing is not God.
But can I please quickly formulate my question before you say?
Well, the problem with... We must first discuss parts of your question. The statements you're making are not about a relationship with God. They're a relationship with a spirit, right, which is not God. So, I know you want to believe it's with God, but it's not. Now, this was a spirit who wanted to meet you, wanted to help you get out of the feelings you had at the time. So that the spirit's motivation, from the spirit's perspective, the spirit's motivation was sort of righteous, they believe. But from God's perspective, the motivation was not righteous. But you now believe that you have a relationship with God when you actually don't have one yet. You have one with a spirit. Now, you don't want to hear that.
No, I want to differentiate. How do you know whether it was with spirit or it was with God?
No, I know you don't.
I lost that connection.
I know you don't want to hear it. I know you don't want to hear what I just said. But I'm saying that this is what's happened.
Sure, but how do I know? That's my question.
Well, firstly, the Spirit is trying to change your life and tell you what your goals in life should be. Now, God never does that. God never does that. God never influences your free will. God only ever responds to your free will. He doesn't influence it. He doesn't say, this is your goal in life. You should do this. Only spirits do that. Right? God does not do that.
But that's not what I was told. Like, I wasn't told you should do this. I came to an understanding myself.
No.
I didn't ask what should I do.
I'm saying, we can talk to the Spirit if you want to, because your Spirit will own up to the fact that He told you to do it. We can talk to that Spirit if you want to. Right? But I'm hearing from Him what happened. Right? You believe He is God, but He is not God. He is a Spirit who suggested to you, made suggestions to you what to do. He was concerned about where you were headed, because you were headed into a suicidal place after the breakup of your relationship and a self-attacking place. And he was concerned about that, and he didn't want you to go there. So he thought he was going to help you by making suggestions about how you can improve your life. And he gave you a number of feelings, which were addictions that he met on your part. And he gave you a number of those feelings, which you interpreted as God at the time. And he just allowed you to continue interpreting that as God because it helped you get out of the dark place you were in. That's what happened.
So was it a good spirit trying to help me, or was it a bad spirit?
Well, he thought he was helping you.
Okay.
Which is not the same as helping you. It's like when you go and help somebody else. Sometimes you do things for other people because you're motivated by your own feelings about the thing. But it's not necessarily actually helping the other person. You know, an example of that is most women who have children believe they're helping their child if they take them to soccer and take them to music and take them to and run around for them everywhere. And most people believe they're helping their child, but actually from God's perspective, you're not helping your child. You're degrading your child's condition by causing the child to believe that your life is to serve the child. Right? So from God's perspective, it's completely the opposite. But the average person on earth believes it's okay, and this is the same with the Spirit. The Spirit is not in a condition that's good enough to be able to say, understand what God's laws are about the matter. And so what the Spirit tried to do is help you, thinking that it's helping you. And also there's some selfish motives on his part as well, because he gets to establish a sexual and emotional connection with you that he doesn't have with another woman on earth. And then he gets to experience things through you as a result of that. So he gets to do all of these things as well and make you feel like they are spiritual experiences.
So can these experiences be continuous? Like,
I would question why you want to continue.
no, I don't want to. This is my question. So it was the Spirit, and he gave me this ability, for example, to feel people's feelings, for example.
Correct. He's telling you their feelings.
But the dialogue in my head completely stopped.
No, he's telling you through feelings. What he does is he projects at you. There's two ways to communicate with a person, well, more than two actually. One is from mind to mind. The other one is by projecting a feeling. So if I project a feeling of rage at Mary, you follow, Mary can feel my rage. If I projected the feeling, if I go, I want Mary to feel how angry I am, she's not feeling that at the moment because I'm feeling quite funny about it. And so that's what she's feeling like. But if I projected rage in a real manner at Mary, even though I don't say anything, Mary can feel it. This is what the Spirit is doing with you. He's going, this is what the other person feels, and he projects the feeling at you, and then you get to feel what the other person feels. And you then feel informed. He's trying to inform you about the other person's feelings, which is true. And a lot of times, by the way, it's not actually accurate. Because there's a limit to his abilities and sensitivity. And so he's only sort of accurate, I would say 10% of the time. But he feels he's accurate 100% of the time. And as a result, you get to feel feelings from him that are the feelings of other people. And then you interpret them as, I can feel other people. Isn't that wonderful? But he's doing this to create a stronger and stronger bond with you for his own reasons, but it's not a relationship with God.
How do I get rid of him?
Well, he's a bit offended.
Yes. If I didn't know I was communicating to him.
No, but he's a bit offended because he feels he's helped you for 5 years, and you've also accepted this help in the past, and so he knows you're in a codependency with him, and he's a bit offended now that you don't want it, which I sort of understand. I would have more of a view with him of how can I educate myself and him about that this relationship is not good for me. That would be a more loving.
Okay.
See, the hellish view is, how can I get rid of him? You understand? The loving view is, how can I grow in love and help him grow in love to the point where we don't have this codependence? That would be the loving view. So partly we can talk to him. You know, you know, that's something you can do. You can talk to him about it. But also you would need to deal with your part of the dependence, your addiction in the dependence. And that's going to require you facing what your addictions are and also the trigger point, which was the relationship, you know, like what happened in the relationship before this occurred. You know, what happened with I'm assuming it was a man in a relationship with? Yep. I'm just hearing from him about the relationship. Probably he's going to tell me more about it than you are. Yeah, so he sort of felt that the way you were headed after you did the thing you did in the relationship and caused harm in the relationship was to go down a very self-abusive and self-attacking road, right? He was worried that that would end up with things like drugs and drink and other substance abuse and other things like that. He was worried about all these things. Whether that was true or not was really his interpretation. And then he was then worried about all that, so then he wanted to help you not go down that road by giving you a whole set of experiences, which you then were willing at the time because you were praying for alleviation of your pain, which is also not a prayer to God, by the way. It's a prayer to spirits to alleviate the pain. And because of that, then the series of events occurred, which got the bond between you established.
So I'm sorry, Mary. I was praying to show me why I did what I did to him. That was my prayer, well, core of my prayer, along with many other things.
Yeah, I wouldn't say you're being honest with yourself there, to be frank.
I agree that you wanted that to be your prayer, if you like that. You wanted to feel like that's what you wanted to do.
Yeah.
But
the emotion coming from you at the time was not that. The emotion coming from you was quite specifically, please rescue me from this pain I am feeling. Right? From the guilt and shame I'm feeling.
what happened with the spirit was, in a large degree, it alleviated you of that pain. Because it sort of gave you information about why you did it. It gave you information about...
Not wholly honest why, though.
No, it's information, not truth. Just information about why you did it.
Not God's truth.
It gave you information about how to do better. And it gave you information about what to do next.
And also who's telling you, get off your backside, start doing some things so that you don't wallow in the self-pity of it all.
So it's...
As well.
Can you see that all three of those things that I mentioned, the thing that, the reason, the information about the reason, the information about how to do better in future, and the information about what to do next, is all taking you away from feeling the pain of what you had done, like really feeling it.
Yeah, probably. And not only the pain, but the cause of it, which is more related to your father and your childhood.
Really,
the emotions you really don't want to feel about, which are related to Dad in particular.
Really feeling that pain is what's going to take you to the cause of why you did it.
And I'm back to that. I tried to feel, I came once several months ago, and I just stopped it because it was too painful.
Yeah.
So yes, but I thought I was on a God's truth
No.
road. Now I'm more confused. Thank you.
But your circumstance is interesting because it does show how we can enter states of delusion, doesn't it? And how easy it is with some spirit help to enter those states. And this is one reason why we've also been on the trip talking to the spirits involved with the person more than just talking to the person, because obviously, the spirit also wants to help in some way and thinks they're helping oftentimes, but oftentimes they don't have God's standard of love either. So the way in which they help is often not the way God would help. Yes. And God does never, ever help you avoid emotion. Ever. God knows you have the power to feel it. He created you as the most powerful, the most intricate creation of the universe, the human soul is. And he created you with the power to feel everything, experience everything, and the ability to do that. So God will never assist you to avoid your feelings, ever.
I'm sorry, I know this sounds strange, but at that point of time, I wasn't avoiding my emotion. I was crying 24/7, like I was really going into core of something.
I'm sorry you weren't. You were feeling what I would classify as
shame.
Guilt and shame, both things. Yeah.
As you were feeling addictions as well as feeling a tantrum, is the best way to put it. A tantrum is like, to put it in a raw way, let's say you're a child, you've got a young child going through a lolly aisle, a candy aisle, what do you call them here? Sweets? A sweet shop or a sweet aisle, and on the child wants the sweet, has got the sweet before, wants the sweet now, and mum says, no, you can't have it, and the child goes into a tantrum. In other words, you can't have what you want, is what the message from the parents is. And then we go into states of crying for days and days and days on end, frequently, particularly when it comes to relationships, because we've got so many addictions associated with relationships. We go into this tantrum phase where you cry for days, you want a relief from the suffering of what's happened, and that's just a tantrum. That's not addressing the cause of what happened, which is to do with your dad, which you already said is too painful to deal with. And what I'm saying is, no, God is going to ask you to deal with it. He's going to help you, but he'll ask you to want to deal with it. So, and that's what you were avoiding in that tantrum. You were avoiding, you were latched onto the relationship and what happened in the relationship, which is why you were grieving. But you weren't actually grieving. Most women grieve by crying. Most women have a tantrum by crying. You've learned to. Most men have a tantrum firstly by yelling and screaming, and then eventually maybe having a few tears. That's how men mostly have a tantrum. Most women have a tantrum by having a good cry, because I've learned in the past that whenever you have a good cry, all of your female friends and other people come to rescue you from your tears, and that's a great way to get away with things. So it's a very common thing. So I'm not saying that it's bad or it's not good for you, but I'm not saying that it's unusual, because it's the same as what most people do. So I know you want to tell me that these were experiences.
Okay, then I come to my original question.
Yes.
How do I establish my true relationship with God? Because so far everything I've known, or I thought I have known, turns out not to be a relationship with God.
Yeah, that's right. A very good question. And that is something we need to answer, isn't it?
Yeah,
but we need to do it after we have something like that, so, because it requires more of a detailed explanation.
I know that won't be a short answer.
No, Mary knows that already. Yeah, so perhaps what we need to do now is have a break, have half an hour, shall we? What's the time? Half past 1, come back at 2, and we'll go until about 4 o'clock today. Yeah, mics can come over here just on the legal mic. Don't tell them.